Right now, at this very moment, roughly half of all the humans alive on Earth would look at what you do in the bathroom and find it genuinely, quietly strange. Because for almost the entire history of our species, and for an enormous part of the planet today, the answer to this most private of all problems was never a soft roll of paper. It was water, a hand, a leaf, a smooth stone, a stick, a shared sponge, a dried corn cob. This is the story of how human beings cleaned themselves after using the toilet for 2 million years, long before toilet paper existed, and why the way you do it, right now, is one of the newest and honestly weirdest habits our whole species has ever invented. It is a story that runs through Roman urine, a communal sponge on a stick, a French novelist's joke about a goose, a Zen master's genuinely shocking answer, and a dried corn cob hanging on a string in an American outhouse. And it starts with the oldest and simplest solution of them all. Let me set the scene for you. It is 50,000 years ago. You have just stepped away from your group, crouched behind a bush, and done the one thing that every single animal on this planet has to do. And now you are facing a small, urgent, and deeply personal engineering problem that not one of your ancestors ever solved with something bought in a shop. There is no soft quilted paper. There are no wet wipes. There is no bidet, no spray, no flush handle. There is only you, the world around you, and whatever that world happens to be offering within arm's reach. So, what do you actually do? The honest answer is that the very first solution was almost certainly the simplest one imaginable, and it is still, today, the most common one on Earth: water and your own hand. Early humans lived tethered to rivers, lakes, and streams. Water was where they drank, where they cooked, where they cleaned their food, and where they cleaned themselves. So when nature called, running water was simply the best cleaning tool available anywhere, and you used the hand you already had. It was free, it was right there beside the water, and it genuinely worked. In much of the world, it still does, and billions of people would tell you, with good reason, that it works far better than dry paper ever could. If a bird dropped waste on your arm, you would not simply dab it with a dry tissue and carry on. You would wash it off with water. To much of the human race, the toilet has always been exactly the same, and dry paper alone has always looked like the strange, half-finished answer. But that simple, sensible solution quietly created one of the most powerful and long-lasting taboos in all of human history. Think it through for a second. If one of your hands is the hand you use to clean waste from your own body, then that is very much not the hand you want to eat with, or greet people with, or prepare food with, or touch a child with. And so, across cultures that had absolutely no contact with each other, in the Middle East, across India, throughout Africa, all over Asia, the exact same unspoken rule quietly appeared again and again and again. One hand is clean, the other hand is dirty. Even today, across a huge share of the world, offering someone food or a handshake or a gift or money with the wrong hand is a genuine and serious insult, the kind of thing that can end a conversation before it starts. That taboo did not come down from a holy book or a king's decree. It rose up from the riverbank tens of thousands of years ago, out of this exact tiny problem. A rule that still silently governs how billions of people eat every single day was born from how our ancestors wiped. And for the many people who lived far from a reliable source of water, the entire world simply became the toilet paper. They reached for whatever the local environment offered: soft leaves and generous handfuls of grass, moss, which is soft, absorbent, and grows almost anywhere that is damp, fistfuls of dry hay and straw. In the frozen Arctic, people used fresh snow and clumps of tundra moss, which sounds shocking until you realize it is clean and cold enough to numb. Along the coasts, some cultures used the smooth inner curve of a seashell, and a few used the sharp edge of a mussel shell as an actual scraper. In the desert, it was smooth sand and rounded, sun-warmed stones. Whatever the land handed you, that is what you used, and people became genuine experts, passing down through generations the knowledge of exactly which local plant was soft and safe, and which innocent-looking leaf would leave you regretting your choices for a week. And here is something people rarely consider. Even the greatest ancient civilizations, the ones with astonishing plumbing, never solved this particular part of the problem. The Indus Valley city of Mohenjo-Daro had covered drains and household toilets 4,000 years ago, and Rome built a sewer so grand it had its own goddess. But carrying waste away in a beautiful channel of water is a completely different achievement from cleaning it off the human body. The toilet could be a marvel of engineering, and what you personally did next was still answered with a stone, a sponge, or a hand. By the time we reach the ancient Greeks, a specific and very deliberate tool appears in the record, the pebble. The Greeks used small, smooth stones for exactly this purpose, and they had a name for them, pessoi, which simply means pebbles. People would carry a small handful, and there was even a well-worn saying that 3 stones were enough to do the job. The comic playwrights of Athens made jokes about the humble pebble right there on stage, which tells you just how ordinary and unremarkable a part of everyday life it really was. But archaeologists studying ancient Greek toilets found something far more petty and far more human buried among the toilet stones. They found ostraca, broken fragments of pottery, and some of them had names deliberately scratched into their surface. Now, in ancient Athens, citizens voted to exile a hated public figure by scratching that person's name onto a ceramic shard and casting it like a ballot. That practice is literally where our modern word ostracize comes from, and there is real evidence that, once the vote was over, some of those very shards, the ones carrying the scratched names of despised enemies and political rivals, were carried off to the toilet and given a second, far cruder job. Wiping yourself with the name of a man you hated may just be the oldest recorded act of pure human pettiness in existence. At this point, you are probably thinking something perfectly reasonable. You are thinking, all right, but surely none of this could have been very clean. And there, you would be exactly, painfully right, because this is where the story turns genuinely grim. Scraping the most delicate skin on your entire body with a rough stone or a jagged sliver of broken pottery causes irritation, tiny tears, and open wounds. And when modern researchers actually studied these ancient toilet pebbles under a microscope, they found them coated in the eggs of intestinal parasites, whipworm, roundworm, and others. The very tool people used to clean themselves was quietly passing deadly parasites from one person to the next, generation after generation after generation. The absence of paper was never the absence of care. These people were trying hard to stay clean. They simply had no possible way of knowing what they were actually spreading with every wipe. Which brings us to Rome, the civilization famous for its engineering, its aqueducts, its roads, and its plumbing, and to the single object in this entire story that modern people find hardest to forget. Roman public toilets were, on paper, a genuine marvel. They were called foricae, long stone benches with rows of round holes cut into them, where dozens of people sat side by side, shoulder to shoulder, with no walls, no partitions, and absolutely no privacy of any kind. Going to the toilet was a social event, a place to chat and do business. And the tool they cleaned themselves with was called the tersorium, a soft, natural sea sponge fixed firmly to the end of a long wooden handle. Now brace yourself, because this is the part that makes every modern person wince. It was shared. It was communal. After you finished using it, you rinsed the sponge in a small channel of running water at your feet, or swirled it in a bucket of salt water and vinegar, and then you left it there, resting in place, for the very next person to pick up and use. One sponge, many, many people, every single day, in every public latrine in the empire. The Romans even had a word for it, the xylospongium, a sign of just how normal a fixture it was. The Roman philosopher Seneca recorded a genuinely dark story about this exact object. He wrote of a captured Germanic gladiator who, rather than be led out to die for entertainment in the arena, chose to take his own life, and the only tool available to him in the latrine to do it was one of these sponge sticks.
Seneca told the story to make a noble point about courage in the face of death, but what it really tells us is how utterly ordinary and how completely ever-present that shared sponge was in daily Roman life. The wealthiest Romans, of course, could opt out. They had servants bring them soft wool soaked in rosewater instead. But for the ordinary citizen, it was the communal sponge. And as advanced as Roman plumbing genuinely was, they had no concept of germs whatsoever.
Study after study of excavated Roman latrines finds them absolutely riddled with parasite eggs, no better and sometimes worse than societies with no plumbing at all. Their engineering was 2,000 years ahead of its time. Their understanding of hygiene was 2,000 years behind it. Now, while Rome was busy passing a single sponge around a room full of strangers,
on the other side of the world, China was quietly about to make a leap that no other civilization would match for well over 1,000 years. But first, the stick. Across China, Japan, and much of the Buddhist world, people use something called a kechu, or in Japan, a chugi, a thin, smooth spatula of bamboo or wood, used to scrape rather than to wipe, then rinsed and reused.
Archaeologists have dug these very sticks out of ancient toilets at sites like Nara in Japan, still recognizable after more than 1,000 years. And these simple toilet sticks were so completely ordinary, so woven into daily life, that they worked their way into the deepest corners of Zen Buddhism itself.
There is a very famous Zen koan, one of those short, baffling riddles used for meditation, in which a devoted monk asks a great master a huge, sincere question. What is Buddha? And the master answers him, flatly and without hesitation, a dried shit stick. The entire lesson of that koan is that enlightenment and truth can be found even in the lowest, most disgusting, most overlooked object imaginable. And the reason it lands, the reason it works as a lesson at all, is that every single person hearing it knew exactly, intimately, what that stick was and what it was for. But China had also, centuries earlier, invented paper. And by the year 589, a Chinese scholar named Yan Zhitui wrote a single line that quietly marks a genuine turning point in the history of the human body. He wrote that he did not dare to use paper printed with quotations from the sages or the names of ancient wise men for toilet purposes. Sit with what that sentence actually reveals. By that point, using paper in the toilet was already so normal, so widespread and unremarkable, that it needed a special rule just to protect the important documents from ending up there. By the time of the Ming Dynasty, China was mass-producing toilet paper on a genuinely industrial scale.
Records show the imperial court alone went through hundreds of thousands of sheets every single year, and the sheets made specifically for the emperor's own personal use were soft, thick, and even perfumed with fragrance. So picture the sheer size of the gap for a moment. While emperors in China were wiping with soft, scented, purpose-made paper, the entire rest of the world was still reaching for a handful of leaves, a smooth stone, or a shared and dripping sponge. That single technological gap lasted for roughly 1,000 years, and it is worth noting where that story ends up. Today, the modern Japanese electronic bidet toilet, with its warm water jets, is arguably the most advanced descendant of that same ancient tradition of cleaning with water, the riverbank, reinvented in porcelain and circuitry. And that gap points straight to the real, deeper truth running underneath this entire story.
There was never one single answer because every culture on Earth independently solved the exact same problem using whatever their particular corner of the world happened to hand them. In the Americas, people discovered that the dried corn cob was surprisingly effective, and it sounds like a joke until you learn that dried corn cobs were still being used across rural America well into the 1800s, kept hanging on a string in the outhouse for precisely this purpose. Sailors far out at sea had perhaps the grimmest method of all, a frayed end of old rope that hung permanently over the side of the ship, trailing in the cold seawater, and used, in turn, by the entire crew. That soggy, salty, shared piece of rope had a name. It was called a tow rag, and it is very likely the direct origin of the insult tow rag that some people still throw around today, almost never knowing that they are calling someone a communal nautical wiping cloth. And it even reached great literature. In the 16th century, the French writer Rabelais devoted a whole comic chapter of his novel Gargantua to a giant testing every conceivable material to wipe himself, before declaring the finest of them all was the neck of a live, downy goose. Nowhere shows the everyday reality better than medieval Europe.
In the great stone castles, the toilet was a small chamber called a garderobe, jutting out from the wall, with a simple hole that dropped waste straight down a chute into the moat or a pit far below. Someone, of course, had to empty those pits, and that someone had one of the worst jobs in all of history: the gong farmer, who worked at night, wading into cesspits to haul the waste away by the bucket.
And for the actual cleaning, ordinary people used what was cheap and close to hand: hay, straw, moss, and grass. Monasteries sometimes kept communal cloth for the purpose. Wealthier households used soft scraps of wool or linen, washed and reused. There was no shame in it and no secret about it. It was simply the texture of daily life in every home in every century. There is another whole layer to this that most people never think about, and it runs right into the heart of human religion. For many cultures, cleaning yourself after the toilet was never merely practical. It was sacred, a duty owed to God. In Islam, the practice is a formal and important part of the faith, called istinja, the ritual cleaning of the body with water wherever possible, and the strict, deeply respected rule of using the left hand, keeping the right hand pure for eating, for greeting, and for prayer.
Buddhism went even further and wrote the whole thing down. The ancient monastic codes contain astonishingly detailed instructions for monks on how to relieve themselves quietly, how to clean themselves properly with water, and how to leave the space decent for the next person. A code of toilet etiquette so precise that it has survived, almost unchanged, for well over 2,000 years. That humble riverbank taboo had been carried all the way up into holy law. Across much of Hindu tradition, too, water and the left hand carry the same weight, and millions to this day carry a small water vessel, the loda, for exactly this. The modern handheld bidet spray found across the Middle East and South Asia is nothing less than the newest chapter of that ancient tradition of water.
The most private act imaginable had been elevated in culture after culture into a matter of the eternal soul. And here is the reframe that quietly changes the entire picture, because it was never really about disgust at all. It was about survival, and it was about status. The shared Roman sponge was not seen as revolting by the Romans. It was simply how a civilized person cleaned themselves in a civilized public place.
The emperor's perfumed paper was not merely about comfort. It was a glittering, unmistakable symbol of unimaginable wealth and rank in a world where almost everyone else on Earth was using a handful of leaves. And centuries later, when the bidet first appeared in France in the 1700s, it arrived not as plumbing, but as expensive aristocratic furniture. The nobility wiped with soft lace and wool, while the poor used rags and hay.
For almost all of human history, how you cleaned yourself after the toilet was not a private, forgettable act. It was a quiet, constant signal of exactly who you were and where you stood in the world. But underneath all the status and all the ritual, there was always the darker reality, and it is the whole reason this humble subject genuinely mattered so much. Before anyone anywhere on Earth understood that germs even existed, every one of these methods was spreading disease and death on a massive, invisible scale. The shared sponge, the reused pebble, the communal rope, the unwashed hand, every single one of them was a highway for parasites, dysentery, and infection to travel from body to body, through households, through crowded cities, through entire empires, toppling more people than many wars ever did.
The diseases that traveled this way, dysentery, cholera, and the endless burden of intestinal worms were among the greatest killers in every crowded settlement humans ever built. And rinsing your hand in a little cold water afterwards, with no soap and no idea germs existed, washed away almost none of it. Advanced plumbing never saved the Romans from this, because carrying waste away in a magnificent sewer does absolutely nothing if the tool you then clean yourself with is passed around a crowded room. Real, lasting relief from this only arrived with two things that are both shockingly, almost unbelievably recent.
Right up until the late 1800s, ordinary Americans mostly wiped with whatever printed paper they already had lying around. Pages torn from newspapers, and especially the thick mail-order Sears Roebuck catalog, which was so widely used for this that it was nicknamed the Rear Admiral, and which country folk genuinely missed when it started being printed on slippery, glossy paper.
The first commercially packaged toilet paper in the Western world did not appear until 1857, when an American named Joseph Gaiety sold flat, medicated sheets, with his own name proudly printed on every single one. The perforated roll we know today came only in the following decades, and the early versions were made so cheaply and so poorly that they could contain tiny splinters of actual wood.
It was not until 1935 that a company was finally able to advertise its toilet paper as, at long last, splinter-free. Which means your own great-grandparents may very well have lived in a world where this simple, daily act still carried a small but genuine risk of injury. So, when you strip all of it away, when did humans actually figure out how to clean themselves after the toilet?
The honest answer is that they never landed on one single solution, because there never truly needed to be just one. They used water and a hand at the very beginning, hundreds of thousands of years ago. They used pebbles and the broken names of their enemies in ancient Greece. They passed a shared sponge in Rome, scraped with a smooth stick in China, wiped with a corn cob in America, tore a page from a catalog on the frontier, and dragged a length of rope through the cold sea on a ship. They wrapped the whole thing in religion, in status, in taboo, and in comedy. The tools kept changing, century after century after century, but the problem itself never changed at all, not once, not for a single human being who has ever lived. But before you go, I genuinely have to ask you, and I want you to be honest with yourself.
Of every single method in this entire video, the shared Roman sponge, the smooth pebble, the length of cold salty rope, the dried corn cob, the bare hand, and river water, which one could you truly, absolutely never bring yourself to try? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's see which one the internet fears the most. So the next time you reach for that soft roll without a single second thought, take one real moment to remember what it actually is. It is one of the youngest, most pampered inventions you touch every single day. Younger than the light bulb, younger than the telephone, barely older than the car. For more than 2 million years, our ancestors solved this same quiet, universal, unavoidable problem with rivers and leaves, with pebbles and pottery, with shared sponges and dried sticks and salty rope and the neck of a goose. Some of it clever, some of it deadly, all of it deeply, unmistakably human. And here is the strangest part of it all. To roughly half of the people alive on this planet right now, the ones who still trust that very first and oldest solution of simple, clean water, it is your method, dry paper and nothing else, that quietly looks like the odd one out. Maybe our ancestors, crouched by the river all those years ago, were onto something from the very beginning. And if you think that was a grim way to end the day, just wait until you find out what ancient humans did about the smell coming off the rest of the body.